Chapter 24. Other considerations. In this chapter, I will address some of the questions that might arise when giving consideration to this subject of marriage for life. One really good question that some ask is, what if I married someone that was not God's will? If God did not will the marriage, then how can He make the two one flesh? This is possibly a question that Jacob asked on the morning after his wedding with Leah.
So it came to pass in the morning, that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? Genesis 29:25. New King James Version.
God did not tell Jacob to put Leah away. Once the marriage was consummated, it could not be broken apart. If our Father in heaven followed the principle of breaking up marriages that were not part of His plan, this is a very good case where He could have revealed this will. Secondly, our Father in heaven is not arbitrary. He does not force His children to go in one direction. He certainly leads us by His Spirit. He impresses our minds with what would be good for us. He answers our prayers when we ask Him for wisdom. But He does not force us. It can be equally argued that God did not warn Jacob to not marry two wives, but this only serves to prove that God does not overrule our choices. He works within the decisions we take and does His best to make them a blessing.
Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. Matthew 18:18-20. New King James Version.
When two people take vows before God, family and friends, God honours the vows that are taken, and He sets about to make all things work together for good. Romans 8:28. We are all God's children, and God is able to send His Spirit to those who ask in faith for help. If we have the agape love of Christ, we will love the one we have made our vows to, and we will ask God to help us live out those vows. If every time a child takes a decision and the parent overturns it, then the child will never feel the weight of their decisions. They will enter a higher level of uncertainty in making decisions, because the decisions they make might be wrong. We consider also the words of Moses regarding vows.
If a man makes a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord, and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows, nor her agreements, by which she has bound herself, shall stand. And the Lord will release her, because her father overruled her. Numbers 30, verses 2-5, New King James Version.
If our Father in heaven were to stand in the place of a father and overrule the vow of his precious daughter, He would have to do this on the day the vow was made. The silence of God at a wedding indicates that He allows the vows of His children to stand, because the cost of altering such a vital life decision after the vow is made is far worse than allowing the vow to be carried. But further to this, as we read above, once a man takes a vow, it can't be reversed.
But above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes, and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment. James 5:12, New King James Version.
We are cautioned to let our yes be yes, and our no be no, lest we fall into judgment. Altering a lifelong commitment does great damage to the soul. Our Father never utters anything that does not stand forever. As His children, we should do the same. The other problem with thinking maybe I married the wrong person is that it robs a person of the power to hold fast their vows. If a spouse does not do what I wish, then I can begin to think it was not God's will that we be married. Such thoughts destabilize the marriage relation and chip away at love and trust. If we take the promises of God, that with Him all things are possible, and we present our requests to Him, then we can rest safely in His word. If God can raise the dead, He can even change us, though we may be blind to our own faults. Another Bible text which needs consideration is this one.
Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14, New King James Version.
If someone marries an unbeliever, we can say that they are unequally yoked. But this text does not apply to the marriage vow, for Peter tells us,
Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. 1 Peter 3:1, New King James Version.
the principle of agape tells us that love suffers long and is kind. It never fails. As we have discussed before, Paul tells us that a man should not leave his wife, nor should a wife leave her husband. But if the unbelieving spouse determines to leave, then the believing spouse is not in bondage to force them to stay. The believing spouse patiently remains single so as to give the departing spouse the opportunity to be reconciled back.
But if she does leave him, let her remain single or else be reconciled to him. And the husband must not leave his wife. 1 Corinthians 7:11.
That is why in the next verse it says that the believing spouse can possibly save their unbelieving partner. How? By bearing their departure without closing their chance to come back by remarrying.
For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? 1 Corinthians 7:16, New King James Version.
An extension to this principle of marrying the wrong person can be found in the story of Ezra, chapters 9 and 10. Several people, especially the leaders, had married pagan wives.
When these things had been done, the Jewish leaders came to me and said, Many of the people of Israel, and even some of the priests and Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the other peoples living in the land. They have taken up the detestable practices of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. For the men of Israel have married women from these people and have taken them as wives for their sons. So the holy race has become polluted by these mixed marriages. Worse yet, the leaders and officials have led the way in this outrage. Ezra 9:1 and 2.
As a result of these sinful practices, Ezra became very distressed. He cries to the Lord in repentance.
I prayed, O my God, I am utterly ashamed. I blush to lift up my face to you, for our sins are piled higher than our heads, and our guilt has reached to the heavens. From the days of our ancestors until now, we have been steeped in sin. That is why we and our kings and our priests have been at the mercy of the pagan kings of the land. We have been killed, captured, robbed, and disgraced, just as we are today. Ezra 9:6 and 7.
The spirit of Ezra is admirable. He feels a deep sorrow for the wickedness of his nation. He repeats in prayer the failure of his nation to obey God's instructions not to marry with other nations.
Your servants the prophets warned us when they said, 'The land you are entering to possess is totally defiled by the detestable practices of the people living there. From one end to the other, the land is filled with corruption. Don't let your daughters marry their sons. Don't take their daughters as wives for your sons. Don't ever promote the peace and prosperity of those nations. If you follow these instructions, you will be strong and will enjoy the good things the land produces, and you will leave this prosperity to your children forever.'" Ezra 9:11 and 12.
He wants to make things right, which was a good thing. The people saw his great anguish, and they came to weep with him. And then one of those who did wrong made a proposal to the nation.
While Ezra prayed and made this confession, weeping and lying face down on the ground in front of the temple of God, a very large crowd of people from Israel, men, women, and children, gathered and wept bitterly with him. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, a descendant of Elam, said to Ezra, "We have been unfaithful to our God, for we have married these pagan women of the land. But, in spite of this, there is hope for Israel. Let us now make a covenant with our God to divorce our pagan wives and to send them away with their children. We will follow the advice given by you and by the others who respect the commands of our God. Let it be done according to the law of God." Ezra 10:1-3.
Ezra takes up this suggestion and puts it into effect.
So Ezra stood up and demanded that the leaders of the priests and the Levites and all the people of Israel swear that they would do as Shechaniah had said. And they all swore a solemn oath. Then Ezra left the front of the temple of God and went to the room of Jehohanan, son of Eliashib. He spent the night there without eating or drinking anything. He was still in mourning because of the unfaithfulness of the returned exiles. Ezra 10:5 and 6.
Then things get serious. A decree went out that those who did not assemble within 3 days would have their property confiscated, and they would be cut off from the assembly.
Then a proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem that all the exiles should come to Jerusalem. Those who failed to come within 3 days would, if the leaders and elders so decided, forfeit all their property and be expelled from the assembly of the exiles. Within 3 days, all the people of Judah and Benjamin had gathered in Jerusalem. This took place on December 19th, and all the people were sitting in the square before the temple of God. They were trembling both because of the seriousness of the matter and because it was raining. Then Ezra the priest stood and said to them, "You have committed a terrible sin. By marrying pagan women, you have increased Israel's guilt. So now confess your sin to the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and do what He demands. Separate yourselves from the people of the land and from these pagan women." Then the whole assembly raised their voices and answered, "Yes, you are right. We must do as you say." Ezra 10:7-12.
What does our Father in heaven do when his children disobey his instructions to them? God meets them where they are. We know that God hates divorce. It is destructive to all involved. But as the nation remained in the Old Covenant, an Old Covenant solution is employed. It is absolutely true that failure to act would pollute the nation to the point that their identity could have been irreparably damaged. Ezra acted as compassionately as possible in the situation.
This was the beginning of a wonderful Reformation, with infinite patience and tact, and with a careful consideration for the rights and welfare of every individual concerned. Ezra and his associates strove to lead the penitent of Israel into the right way. Prophets and Kings 6:22.3.
But as Jesus said to the Pharisees, this was an accommodation to the hardness of human hearts. God did not instruct Israel to take this action, but the reform brought blessing to them. We might compare this to the actions of the priest Phinehas, who ran a javelin through Zimri and Cosbi to close the breach in Israel, bringing a blessing upon Phinehas. His actions do not represent the character of God, but Israel was delivered from a crisis of their own making. When God told Abraham to listen to his wife to send Hagar and Ishmael away, this was an old covenant solution to an old covenant situation. If Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar were able to fully embrace the new covenant, they all would have repented for the parts they played. Hagar would have confessed to Sarah her wrong, and likewise Sarah to Hagar. Hagar would have then acknowledged that her relationship with Abraham was adultery, and she would have stepped down herself from the relationship. With the relationship healed, Ishmael might still have grown up under the protection and blessing of Abraham, and Hagar might have been provided for not too far from Abraham's home. But human nature makes these things very hard to do. Throwing out Hagar and Ishmael does not represent the character of God, and there are always consequences from such actions. But it was the best thing to do in the current circumstances. Therefore, we would not look to this example in Ezra to provide us a guide on how to deal with certain situations related to divorce. Marrying a pagan wife certainly qualifies as being unequally yoked, but the response was not a new covenant solution, nor did it reflect God's character. Consider the example of when Jesus encountered leprosy. He had the power to heal the leprosy rather than becoming infected by it. If the men in Israel who had married pagan wives had this spirit, they might have won their wives to the truth. But their desire to marry a pagan wife reveals their low level of spiritual perception, ensuring that they would receive the leprosy of pagan customs rather than overcoming them. In breaking the vows they had taken in marriage, they suffered damage, but it was the best outcome for a bad situation at that time. In light of the person of Jesus and his revelation of the character of God, we are called to come up higher than this